Model Context Protocol, or MCP, allows you to connect a language model to tools. And I mean tools like GitHub, or LinkedIn, or Gmail, but also tools that can help you do things like reading documents. I'm going to explain how you can set up a server using Python or JavaScript and TypeScript. And once you've set up the server, you can deploy it to a package repository like PyPI or npm. I'll also show you something useful, which is taking an existing server, adjusting it to add functionality, and then republishing it as your own MCP server. Now, the flow of this video is to start off with two simple examples, one for Python, one for JavaScript, and then I'll move to more complicated examples where I write a document reading and editing type server, and I'll do that using a combination of Python and also TypeScript. All of the scripts for the video are going to be in the advanced-inference repo. That's at trials.com/advanced-inference. You can see now it contains the scripts from the previous video about using MCP. I recommend looking at that if you're new to MCP, and now the content about building and publishing MCP servers. I will try to describe everything in the video, so if you're not in a position to buy access to this repo, you can at least replicate it by yourself. Now I've cloned the advanced inference repo and moved into the trials-mcp folder. I'm looking at the README file, which contains some of the instructions from the first video on using MCP. I recommend that, as I said already. But I'm about a quarter of the way down, and I'm in the section on creating MCP servers, which has a simple Python-based MCP server. Then we'll cover a simple NPX. That's a JavaScript or TypeScript-based server. And then we'll cover more advanced examples using Python and TypeScript. And I'm going to do a use case for the more advanced examples. Specifically, I want to be able to read a PDF using MCP. And the way I'll read it is by first having a tool that allows me to convert it into Markdown. And then I'll be able to read that Markdown using a reading tool. And I'm actually going to modify the reading tool. There's already one you can use that's called file-system, and it's one of the core MCPs from Anthropic. But you can modify it so that it allows you to read specific lines. And this is beneficial because it now gives you flexibility to read really long files by just looking at a portion rather than running out of context. Now, I'm going to show you the npm-npx based server first, and then I'll show you Python, just because you'll see the analogy when we do Python with the npx setup, which is nice and clean. The key to setting up a server with JS or TypeScript for MCP is, first of all, to initialize a project. Second of all, to install the dependencies, then add in a server script. Make sure that you have a package.json that includes a bin parameter that points to the server file itself. And then you can test out your MCP using mcp-inspector. And last of all, push it up to npm. So I'll go through those steps. I'm going to delete the files I have in npx server. So by the way, I've just changed directory into npx server, cd npx server. And for the demo, let's delete all of the files that are in here. So we'll start from scratch and initialize a project with npm in it. We'll create a git ignore file. We'll set the type of the package to a module, and we'll install the Model Context Protocol SDK. Now, if you have other dependencies, you'll need to run npm install to install any dependencies in your package.json. This is a simple server, so there's not going to be any. Now, because we're going to run this as a package that we want to be able to run with npx, by the way, what does npx do? It will install the packages. It will install the dependencies of the package within a virtual environment, within an environment, a temporary one. And then it is going to run the script. But to run the script, it needs to know which script to run. And that's why we need to add this bin field here to our package.json to point out that we're going to run a file called npx server. And that's actually the file name we'll use for the server. So we'll call it npx server.js. I'm just creating the script here. And then I'm going to indicate that that's the script we're going to want to run. So I'll add it in here to my dependencies, not to my dependencies, into my package.json. And I'm going to add in now the content of my server. So I want to copy paste all of this simple example here, which is just adding numbers, and paste it into server.js. You can take a quick look. It imports the Model Context Protocol JS file, standard in out. That's if you want to run the MCP service locally. There's also the approach for doing server sent events. We'll import Zod for helping us set up here the addition. This is the tool. And then we're going to set up the transport as standard in-out base server. And finally, we're going to connect. So we have the server file ready now, and we can provide permission to run that script with chmod. And now we can start the inspector. So there are two ways to start the inspector. One is you can start it just by running this first part here, which I'll do now. And the second way is you can pass in the full, you can start it, but also pass in the full npx command for your custom service. And by doing this, it will just pre-populate the UI so that you can run the command pretty quickly. Actually, let's just do that. Notice that I'm passing in the full path here to my npx-server.js file. So when the server, or when the inspector starts up, you'll see npx and the command for running my server is pre-populated. Now, if you have environment variables, you can set them up here. You can set up a configuration, including a timeout that's 10,000 milliseconds. That's how long it'll allow for one request. If you're converting, for example, a PDF into Markdown, maybe you need that to be larger. And then I'll connect. And once I'm connected, I can see that this only has tools. It doesn't have any resources because it's a simple addition function. And we can add up stuff like this here. So that's npx running in the inspector. And what we want to do now is push this up to a package repository, namely npm. It's the most popular one. And this will allow us to just do a quick npx and then the name of the package as pushed up to the repository. Now, before we do that, just a note that you can also test out this package directly within Cursor or within Claude Desktop. You need to adjust your JSON to the following, to npx server. Make sure you've got the full path in here. I can show you how to do that very quickly. Go to Cursor Settings, go to MCP, and add a new server. And I'm going to add it right at the top. Put in a comma, save, and check that it's able to initialize. And yeah, important that you put in the correct path. I had an older path here of just MCP, so I fixed that path here. Let's fix it also within the JSON. So I copy it in here, save, and if I enable this now, it's all working. And if I go to Cursor, I can say add these two numbers. And it should request my permission. So it's using the tool. And if I run the tool, it's going to add up here. So this looks good. The last step now is to publish the package. So we want to make sure that the package.json is configured. It does need to have this bin field here, as I said before. And if you've not already initialized, I mean, you should really have had this done at this point because you've initialized your project. You've also set this. You've also installed the requirements. Sorry. So really all this, by this point, you should have done, or run even npm install if needed. That's only if you've other dependencies, and we've already run install and what we need. So next we're going to log in, and I'll just exit from the inspector here. npm is going to ask me to authenticate. So I've authenticated, and I can go back now to Cursor. And now we'll move to building and preparing the packages. So typically you might need to build. This is common if you're using TypeScript. We have a very simple JavaScript server here, so there's actually no build step required. You can put in this kind of a placeholder just to say that there's no build step required if you want to define some scripts. So that now if I set this up like this, and sorry, I've actually duplicated. So I can get rid of this and I can put it in up here. Okay. So we've defined just kind of a placeholder for build. And now if I do npm install, which I already have done, this is probably already, and you can run npm build, although also that's just going to run this dummy step here that says no build required. We can now publish. So if I do npm-publish and set access to public, you can run it private as well, but that means people will need to have an npm login if they're going to make use of your package. And yeah, those users, I think you have to pay something like $7 per month. So anyway, it's typical to make the packages public, which I'm going to do here. If you're going to update the package, then you need to increment the version. I've already published a version, so I'm going to increment it by 1. And let's see what issue is hitting here. Oh yeah, and there's one more thing I should say, which is You don't want to publish this as a generic npx server as the name. You want to put in your org beforehand. So I've put in here Trellis, because this is the name of Trellis Research on NPM. And once I've got that in there, I think it should be fine for publishing. So yeah, everything has been pushed as version 1.0.1. And that means now I can run this as a package with npx. And the package, as I said earlier, this will install the dependencies and run the package. And it can simply be run like this. Now, you're not just going to run it from here unless you want to get a server going and hit it using some tool that's capable of that. You're more likely going to add this in as follows. You're going to copy the config, go back over to cursor, and you can see instead of putting in the local paths, we're now just going to define a server called adder, and it's simply going to run npx and then the version. And yeah, I think the version I've just pushed most lately is 1.0.1. So we'll go ahead and run that. We can refresh and it looks like it's all working. I could test it out over there. Now, if you want to run this in Claude, it would be the very same thing. Just copy this here, open up Claude. Let me pull across Claude so you can see it here on the screen. Go to developer, edit config, then open up the config, and within the open up the config here, and within it, just add in that server that you want. Press save, close that down. And now you actually have to close Claude. So I'm going to close it here with quit, and then I'm going to rerun it as follows. And here I can say add up. And Claude should be able to request me to use the tool. Yeah, that's right. And I'll allow it once, and it's able to add up here. Okay, so that is the demo here of how to build and push an npx server. By the way, you can see git ignore was automatically created earlier, so node modules won't be pushed up. And next we're going to move to running, before that, I should mention, if you're going to use a TypeScript type server, this is going to be very similar to what I showed you for a simple JavaScript one, except you're going to now definitely need to build. You're going to need to build before you run the deployment. So a lot of the commands will be similar here, but you're going to create a TypeScript project out of the gate instead of creating just a simple npm init. Now, I won't go through some of the rest of the description here. Broadly speaking, this is written in TypeScript instead of JavaScript. You do need to have start script, build script. This can be handy to define these if you want to quickly build or start your service. But the steps are going to be pretty much the same. Next, I'm going to move on to a simple Python-based MCP server. The key to a Python-based MCP server is to do everything in a similar way that you would for a JavaScript or NPM-based server. So you want to initialize a project, ideally using uv-init. You want to add the dependencies with uv-add, add each of the dependencies. You'll want to test it out using the mcp-inspector. You can actually run that still using npx. So npx and run the inspector. And inside the inspector, you can use a uv command to run your Python server. And last of all, when that's working, you can push up your package to PyPI, for example. And that will allow you to run your package then with UVX and PyPI. The thing UVX does is similar to npx. It will install the dependencies in a temporary environment and then allow you to run your script. So I'll go through all of that in detail now. First off, you will run that uv-init. You can specify a build backend. Typically, this would be setup tools, but Hatchling is a bit more modern and faster, so we'll use that. So I'm going to cd first into PyPI. And what have I called the folder? It's called PyPI MCP test. And again, as earlier, I'm going to just delete the files that I have so that we can see everything be created from scratch. So let's delete everything here and cd into the folder, which I've already done. And now we can initialize the project. And you can see when we initialize, it will already create a project file here, pyproject.toml, kind of analogous to package.json. And it will create a source folder with a folder specifically for our module that is to go inside of PyPI MCP test. There's also an init.py file. This automatically gets run anytime you import this package. So we're going to need to adjust that later as well. Now, first, we're going to add in any dependencies. This is a simple project, so we only depend on the MCP library. And when we run that, it's been added into the pyproject.toml. So you can see it's listed in here. Now with the dependencies added, we need to create our service script, and I'm going to put the service script inside this PyPI MCP test folder. So I'll create a new file, and I'm going to call it PyPI_MCP test.py, just following the conventions of using underscores here for the folder for this script here, but for the package itself to use dashes. And I'm going to copy in a very simple server. So I'm going to grab this code, and it's just again an adder, and I'm going to paste it in to the Python file here. And notice how it first imports this fast MCP that's used to initialize an MCP specifically for this service here. And I'm going to call it demo. And then I define the tool using @mcp.tool, which is a simple adder. So at this point now, we can actually test the service, and we can test it using this MCP library actually. So there's a command that's mcp-dev, and mcp-dev, when you point it to the script, it will start up an MCP service in the inspector. It'll pretty much do what we saw before for the JavaScript example. And furthermore, if you run it with UV run, then UV is going to manage the environment. So let's quickly run that there. Here's the service, and we should be able to connect. And there are no resources within tools. Looks like it's trying to run, it should run a standard IO. So let's just check this. And what I recommend here, if you want to test the service, is actually just always use the paths, the full paths. It's a little bit of a pain, but the paths seem to give repeated issues when you're testing out these servers. So I'm just going to paste in the path here. I got that by right-clicking on the file and just getting copy path, the total path, not the relative path. So I'll connect to the service and open it up. And if I connect here, I can list the tools and add, and it adds up the amount here. So all is working well. There is one more command you can use. You can use mcp-install. This in principle should install the service within Claude Desktop directly. You will still need to restart Claude Desktop, so you can run this and it should work. Something I'll note though is as you get to more complex services, this command often will not set the correct path, and it needs to set the correct path to the script, but also to the UV environment. So it can become easier just to manually configure the Claude Desktop. And so it's common for me anyway to just copy paste this here and put it into the config, whether I'm using Cursor or Windsurf or whether I'm using Claude Desktop. So I'm going to just do a quick demo here of how to do it in Cursor. I'll copy the path, make sure that it's pasted in here. And now I'll copy the name of this server. If I go to MCP, I'm going to paste it in. It's now called demo. And actually I'll delete this demo down here. And if I go to my settings, you can see everything appears to be working, and I can add up numbers now in the sidebar. So at this point, we've set up a basic server and we've got it running locally. What we want to do now is to push it to a package repository, namely PyPI, PyPI. And for that, we want to make sure we have set this up as a package and not just as a script. So to make this into a script, or rather to make this into a package, we need to reorganize a few things. We need to have what's called an entry point. This indicates to Python how to start up the service. It's analogous to pointing JavaScript to that server file. You remember when we entered the bin. So we need to have an entry point. It's typically done by having a main file. So I'll just create it here, put a new file here, and it's going to be called main.py. And this will serve as a simple entry point that will call our main function. And to call our main function, we need to define a main function, and it's common to define that within init.py. You could also define it within cli.py, but we're going to put it in init.py. And that main function should simply start the server with mcp run. So I'm going to get some help here from Cursor, and I'm going to say update init.py to have a main function that runs mcp, and create a main script that calls main and serves as an entry point when the package is run. So let's just copy this here into a new Cursor request. Let's also include some documentation. So you will want to include some background on PyPI and MCP. So find the PyPI MCP and copy this here and input it as context. Now, if you want it in clean form, you can do or.gina.ai. You can also use the URL and add the URL into Cursor or Windsurf so that it's got access. I like to copy this here and then put it into a references file. So I'll typically have a references folder and I'll have MCP, let's see, PyPI MCP, this one here, and I've pasted in that markdown. So now when I do a request like this update here, I can just type in PyPI and make sure that it's going to reference this markdown file with the documentation. So one other thing I should add in is I should include the Python script. So I'll include PyPI MCP test, which is this one here. And with that, I think it should be able to update my init and my main file. And when we have that done, we'll now be able to run as a module rather than running as a script. And this is the basis for us then being able to release this as a package. So let's take a quick look at what it's done at main.py. It hasn't done anything just yet. Okay, now it's set up. It's actually easier if I look at it without the diff. So in main.py, it's just calling main, which is the entry point, and it's importing that main from the package, at which point the package will already have access to anything in init.py because that is run on import. And then if we look at init.py, it's simply running the MCP service, which is going to run what we've defined over here. So I'll accept all, and I'm ready now to test out the package, or rather test out this service as a module. So I could run uv run-m, that means run as a module, and then pass in the module name. Or I can also run it and test it in Cursor. So here, there are a few things. You can see essentially this is uv run-m for module, and this here. So it's equivalent to running this. But additionally, I'm pointing to this directory. And this is going to be necessary if you want, because Cursor doesn't know what directory that we're going to be in. So we need to provide the absolute path. So if I copy the path to this package here, I'm now ready. So I'll copy this, close off main, close off init, go to Cursor settings. And now we're going to run this not as a script with an absolute path, but we're going to run it as a module. And we should see here, yeah, everything is working fine. And we could add up there if we wanted. So now we're able to run this as a module. And I'm going to show you one last way, which is to run it from a GitHub. It could be a private or public GitHub, before then showing you how to push it as a package. So if you have saved everything, so say you've saved all your changes here, I'll just go ahead and save everything and push it up to GitHub. Note that I'm on the main branch. If you're not on the main branch, you would need to specify which branch you are on in this next step. And I can actually run, rather than running here and having to specify my directory and then having to run as a module, I'm now able to run by saying uvx, which will install my dependencies and then run the script by finding the entry point and pointing instead to my GitHub repo. So this here is literally the address of this GitHub repo, advanced-inference. And then I've got the subdirectory, which is going to be trials-mcp, PyPI MCP test. So that's just saying within advanced-inference, go to trials-mcp, PyPI MCP test. So let's test out this third approach here. I need to go into my MCP, paste, put in the comma, and check everything is working here. Yeah, everything's working well. So you can see I'm getting towards a kind of simpler representation. This is going to be nice if you want to distribute it in a private GitHub repo, because you can, for free, add or remove people's access to a GitHub repo compared to NPM where you have to pay, or PyPI, I think, as well. But if you want to put it public, then probably it makes sense to push it as a package to PyPI. So for this, you're going to need a few things. You'll need to have your pyproject.toml. This should have the dependencies, the build system configuration, which is going to be hatchling, and the MCP entry point. So everything here, it's got the dependencies, it's got the build system. Everything here should be good. You'll want to have some kind of version for your package. I've already pushed, I think, version 0, so I can push maybe version 1 here, and I can put in the description a simple MCP test service. And it's also added in when I did UV init, it's added in my name and the email to use. And you do need to have a README. So there's a simple README here, simple README. Often you can get Cursor to write that. And now you can start to install. So you'll want to, install the build tools. So we're going to add build and twine, which are going to help us to build this up. And then we're actually going to build the package. So it's creating a build environment. And now you need an account on PyPI. So I already have an account. And you can start to upload. Now, when you run upload, well, let me say this first. When you build, what's happening is it's building out these distribution files here. And when you upload, it's pushing those up. So now if I run this command here, it should ask me to log in to PyPI. I think it's going to ask me for a token. Yeah, it's going to ask me for an API token. So I have to go up, find that API token, and then enter it. So you want to log into pypi.org, log in here, log in using your username. So here my username is Ronan Trellis. And yeah, I need to authenticate and then get an API key and pass that API key back down here so that I'm able to do the full login. Now, when that's all done, you're going to have a package that's pushed up. I do have a package up here. It's called PyPI-MCP test. And yeah, you can see here, this is a service that's been, does it say it's been pushed up by Trellis? Yeah, Ronan Trellis. And it will explain how you can either install it using UV add or directly using UV run, and also how to use it with the npm-inspector. So yeah, for example, I could test this very quickly by starting the inspector with this portion. Sorry, my screen is small. And then passing this command here, which will get auto-populated. So if I go back here to my terminal, I've got the service up and running. And you can see it's pre-populated here, PyPI-MCP test. And we should have a tool. We should have the ability to add. And there we go. We've added up our two numbers. So that pretty much rounds up how you can install a simple Python server. Notice how terse this is. This is the short little snippet you need to copy paste. Now, if you want to set up your service, for example, I can go into my my cursor settings again, and now I've reduced it down to just UVX and the package name, and it looks like everything is working correctly there. So this is what you would paste in as well to your Claude configuration if you want to run. Now, just as a final example to give you more of a feel with this, if you want to run a service that already exists, for example, there's a service called MCP server time. Let's check that out here on PyPI. This is a service, I didn't build it, but it's available for getting the time if you want your LLM to know the time. And here you can see the service details, and it should include how to start up. It actually, does it include? Yeah, here's how you can test it out using NPX and the model inspector, mcp-inspector. So let's go back here, start this up, and within the inspector, let's connect list of tools. And you can see there are two different functions. One is to get the current time. You can just run it, and it's missing a time zone. So I need to paste in what my time zone is. I think it should be Europe, Dublin. And doesn't like that. Yeah, so without these apostrophes, it's getting the time zone. And there's also the ability to put in a source time zone, a time, and to get a target time zone and figure out what the time is from there. So that's the server time zone. You can also run this if you want in Cursor or in Claude Desktop. Here's what you need to copy. Don't forget to add this in here. And by the way, if you're wondering what the syntax is for your given region, you need to run this short snippet here, which is run using tzData. So uv pip install tzData. I can do it quickly there. Uv pip install tzData. Run a Python interpreter. So I can run uv run Python. And now I can just run these two lines of code, paste them into that Python terminal. And here you go. This is a list of all of the different time zones that you might want to run. Next, I'll explain how to set up some more advanced Python and TypeScript MCP services. Namely, I'm going to show you how to take an existing service and modify it to add functionality. This is going to be useful pretty often because there are just a lot of servers already out there, but sometimes they don't do one thing you might want them to do. For example, there's a file system MCP from Anthropic, and it works very well for reading system files, but it fails in two ways. One is that it can only read text files, so if you hit a PDF, you can't read it. And second of all, when it reads a file, it puts the whole file in context. That means you're going to run out of context if you have a very long document. So the solution is to modify the file system MCP so that when it reads a file, you can specify the line numbers to read. And the second modification is to allow the file system MCP to actually read PDFs by converting them first into some other format like MD or docx. Actually, MD, you also need to convert docx into MD type format if you want to be able to read it. So the easiest way to do that, in principle, you could modify the file system MCP, but it's built using JavaScript, TypeScript actually. And I want to use a library called marker-PDF for conversion of PDFs into MD. And that library is a Python library. And therefore, I'm just going to set up a separate MCP for doing document conversion. And then I'm going to modify the file system MCP, which is JavaScript, TypeScript based, in order to allow me to read just a specific set of lines. Okay, so I'm working on the advanced Python and MCP services. And the first thing I'll do is make the document converter, which is a Python-based MCP. And then I'm going to show you how to modify an existing MCP, which is a TypeScript one. It's the file system MCP from Anthropic. And I'll modify that to read specific ranges of lines from the document. Here's the first part, actually. It's publishing a Python MCP. And for that, we're just going to move to the .convert folder. And then we'll come back and do the npx or the TypeScript MCP for reading specific lines of the file. So I'm going to go to the .convert folder here and open up the README. I'll also cd into that folder as well. So .convert. And I've already created this, but I'm going to kind of recreate it just so you can see some of how this is working. And yeah, to do that, I'm going to keep my .convert file, so I won't rebuild that. But just for the sake of demonstration, what I'm going to do is delete all of the other files. So I'll delete even the source, distribution, and the virtual environment. Okay. So let's now follow the instructions. First thing is to initialize a project. We're following the same things we did for the simple Python MCP. We're going to initialize a project with a hatchling backend. So that's now initialized, and we have an init file here. Then we're going to add some dependencies. So we're going to add MCP itself. We'll add marker-PDF, which we'll use for PDF conversion. We'll add PyPandoc, which is going to allow us to convert documents from Markdown to PDF, docx, I think, to Markdown, and Markdown to docx as well. Now, you'll see there's a dependency here for transformers. That's because currently, if you just install marker-PDF, it will use the latest transformers, and there's a breaking change there, actually. So you do need to pin this version of transformers in order for marker-PDF to work. Note that for all of this to work, you need to have Python, obviously, but you also need to have Pandoc installed. So brew install Pandoc on your Mac, or find the equivalent for Windows or Linux. And then brew install UV. You also need to have UV installed. Okay, so we've added the dependencies. And next we need to actually write the package. And this means writing docconvert.py file, and also updating the init.py and the main.py. The main.py will serve as an entry point. So what we want to do here is ask the LLM to write us a file, an MCP. We'll include the documentation that's going to do all of the conversions. Now, I've done this in advance, so I'm just going to copy paste. I'm just going to move the file I've created earlier into the right directory. It needs to be an src.convert. And I'm going to show you a little bit what this does. So there are some helper functions we have first. We have a validation function just to check that if a path is passed in, because this whole MCP is going to take in a document path, and then it's going to take in a desired output format. For example, you pass in a PDF path, and then you pass in the desired format of MD, and it should convert it to MD. So if we pass in a path, we need to check that the file exists. We have another helper function to validate format. It needs to be one of PDF, docx, or MD. They're the only valid ones. And then we also have this helper function here to run commands using UV. So that's necessary for being able to run marker single, and also to be able to run Docker. Not Docker, to run pandoc, PyPandoc. And yeah, just a reminder, PyPandoc is the Python package that wraps pandoc, so it will find pandoc on your machine. Notice that if we do run marker single, it's just redirecting the standard output and standard error to dev null. So it's just ensuring that there are no issues there. Now, the actual worker function is convert document. It takes in an input path and it takes in a desired output format. And if it succeeds, it will give a success message. Now, notice that I've also included some detailed instructions around a few things. This is important because the LLM needs to know when it sees the tool. It needs to know where the new document is going to be created. If it's a PDF or a docx, then it's just going to be created in the same path as where the original input file was. But if it's a markdown file, it's actually going to appear in a folder by the same name of the input document. And then there's going to be the markdown within that folder along with any images from the markdown. So it's important to clarify to the tool where the output files go, because on the next step, you're going to want the tool, and when I say tool, I mean agent running the tool, to know where to find the file that it's then going to read. So here we run through some of the helper functions. So we're doing some validations of the file existing, the format, and then depending on the exact conversion case, for example, here with a PDF input and markdown output, we're going to call marker single. If we want to go from docx to MD, then we're going to call the PyPandoc. You can see it here. And likewise for MD to docx or PDF, we'll call PyPandoc. So this is the entire convert document. And for this to be set up as a package, we need to properly update the init.py. And we also need to add in here a main.py. So I'll add in a main.py. And I'm just going to get some help from Cursor to update these. So let's just ensure we've got the right main.py, init.py, doc.convert. And let's include as well the documentation from earlier, which is from PyPI, the MCP on PyPI. And I'm going to say update my main to provide an entry point, and also update my init to be appropriate for this package. Okay, so the init.py has been updated, and actually we should delete this definition of main. Yeah, okay, it also was trying to copy me and remove that definition of main, so that's fine. Yeah, I don't know if we need the version here necessarily. And then in the main file. So actually this is wrong. In the main file, it needs to be a simple entry point that calls mcp.run. And we're also going to make sure that the main is correctly imported here, which, yeah, I think it is also going to fix. So let's check now our main. So we do have a simple main function that's just calling mcp.run, which is what we want. And then in the init file, we have the imports. So yeah, you can see maybe it was overkill using Cursor. If I know what I'm doing, I know that I need a simple entry point, and I know that the init file just should have imports. It shouldn't do anything else. So with this done now, I should be able to just run uv run-m.convert. And that's working. The way I know it's working is because it's still running here. Basically, the client, the service is running. A better way to test it is now to use the inspector. So I'll go to the README, and I'm going to go to run npx with the model inspector, and then run that same command. So let's try that out. We'll just minimize so I can now open up the inspector. And here's the inspector. Connect, check the tools. The convert document file is here. And if we want to test it out, notice that when we call this document converter, we will need to pass in a document path. So for example, I could take this path here of this README, and let's have it converted to docx. And it's converted to docx. And you can see the README here. If I just, I could open that up. Let me see, I need to close down the converter. So let me first just check out converting a PDF. I'll put in the path here of a PDF. Let's paste it here and let's convert this to Markdown. Okay. Now this will take a bit of time because the marker PDF package takes probably about 15 seconds to run all of the, say, table recognition, structure recognition, etc. But we should see a folder appear here where the converted PDF is going to appear as a Markdown form. Okay, so it says it has converted. Yeah, here we go. So we have the converted file, and you can see here it's in Markdown and the images are right beside it. So I'll just delete that so we can test it again later on. But for now, we know that this package is working well, and we can now decide either to push it up, say to PyPI, if we want to make it a public repo, public package rather, or we can just run it from GitHub using UVX. So for example, you can run this if you've git cloned using the local path. So this is just pointing to the local path by passing in the directory command. And this is relevant if you want to set up in Cursor or Claude. Or alternatively, you can use this more succinct approach using UVX, which is going to basically install it into a temporary environment and then run the package that way. So if you want to use the UVX approach, you're going to copy in this kind of syntax. You've got .convert to UVX, and then we're just pointing to the GitHub repo, which is advanced-inference. And furthermore, we're pointing to the subdirectory. And I think you don't necessarily have to have the .git. It should work either way. We can test it out easily just by going to Cursor settings. And then in here, we'll paste in the MCP. I've actually got it in there already, but let's just put it in again. We'll test it this time without .git. And we can check it by just enabling it, refreshing. And then in Cursor, we can ask to convert some kind of a file. So we could say, convert this readme.md, copy the path, and say, convert into docx. Now, Cursor should ask me for approval. And if I approve, we should see a docx file appearing here, which we do. And so everything looks good in terms of this conversion. So that is us built for the document conversion tool. And you can see I've added it to Cursor. So we're now able to, we're not able to read, well, we are now actually able to read files. Because if we ask Cursor to read this PDF, what it should do is first convert and then read the file. So that is going to work well. The only problem that we can run into is if the file is extremely long and we run out of context, we're not going to be able to get around that because the read function that we have is not able to read specific lines. Now, interestingly, Cursor has its own set of tools and it does have a read function that allows it to read specific lines. So it would be capable in this case of, say, reading the PDF. I can just ask it as an example. Let's copy the path here. I'm going to turn off the file system here. I just want to have this .convert tool. We let Cursor rely on its own file system. And I'll say read the first 5 or 4 lines of this file. And what we hope that it will do is to convert it. So yeah, it says we're going to convert it to Markdown. It'll give me the option to approve. And this will take 15 seconds. And then hopefully it'll decide to read it using its own internal tool. So this works in Cursor. It'll work in Windsurf as well if you just provide document conversion as a tool, which we've done via UVX. But if you want this to work in Claude Desktop does not have the ability to read files, at least natively, at least not from your file system. So you do need to provide a file system MCP. But the file system MCP, the default one, if you just use the one from Anthropic, does not allow you to read specific lines. So the next part of the video, I'll show you how we're going to modify the existing MCP from Anthropic. So we're going to take an existing MCP and then we're going to republish it with the ability to read specific lines. So you can see in the meantime, this has been converted here to a docx, and now it's probably going to be able to read the first few lines. Let's check it out. Yeah, it's reading chain of draft, and it's going to grab the first few lines. We can see what it grabs. Well, we can see, yeah, first 200 lines here. And yeah, it's got the first 4 lines correct. So let's just delete, again, this folder where we've converted, because ultimately we want to run in Claude Desktop. by using the file system MCP. I'm going to exit here from my testing service. I'll just delete that docx I created earlier. And now I'll move on to the next section, which is to copy essentially the file system MCP from Anthropic and then republish it. So here's the way I'm going to do it. You could fork the repo, and I'll show you what the repo looks like here now. You can just go to model context protocol and then go to servers on GitHub. And you'll see there are many servers here, including the file system MCP one that's right here. Now you could fork this whole repo and make some edits. However, there are a lot of MCPs, and when you try to rebuild, it will try to rebuild all of the MCPs. So it can be easier just to copy out the files, and that's what I'm going to do. So over in Cursor, I'm going to now move back into the trials-mcp folder, and I'm going to clone the servers repo from Anthropic. And then I'm going to create, so here's the servers repo. I'm going to create a new file system or a new folder where I want to put my copy. And I've already built this, but just to show you, I can again actually delete some of these files here. So if I just delete, actually I can pretty much delete everything. And I'm going to now go into the src folder, copy the file system files. So I'll leave out the Docker file, but I'll copy the other 4. And I'll paste them in here to Trellis file system MCP. Now I'm going to delete the servers folder at this point because it can cause clashes with UVX. It can cause issues. So I've deleted that, and I've just got the files that I need right here. Now, continuing on with my instructions, I've cloned, I've copied, I've deleted the servers folder, and I'm going to get Cursor now to update the index.tx file so that we can adjust the read file function. So read file will normally read the complete contents, but we actually wanted to read only a portion. So, we wanted to read the full if it wants, but optionally to read a specific set of file lines. So I'm going to say update to support reading a specific range of lines, and add a note that the read tools only work for text files. Although for docx and PDF files, a convert tool, if available, may be used to first convert to text. So I'm adding in this information within the tool so that it knows to give some guidance to the agent using it, that if it's a PDF or docx, it should first do the conversion. Okay, so should start to edit now my TS file. And in the meantime, we're just going to go into the package.json for the Trellis file system MCP. So we'll go into package.json. We're going to modify all of this because this is specific to Anthropic. And we're also going to change the name of the package because we want it to match the organization I'm going to push to on NPM, which is Trellis. And I'm going to call it MCP file system. I'll also change the version here. I'll just change it to version 3 because I pushed some earlier versions previously. So let's take a look at the index.ts. And you can see here, it's adding in my instructions. And it also should be modifying the server so that it can take in an argument for the line numbers. And yeah, it looks like it's doing that. So I'm going to accept the file. And there's one more thing I need to do, which is I need to get Cursor to review the tsconfig file because this was set up for use within the original server folder. So you can see some of the, it's not able to extend tsconfig because that's it's in a parent folder, but we are no longer inside that same repo. So I'm going to ask Cursor to update here tsconfig. I'll say view the tsconfig file. And once that's done, we should be in a position to test out the service. And, we like to test it using the inspector. We will first want to make sure that we build. So you can see here, it's making some changes. And yeah, this is kind of optional. Let's just accept the changes here. So we'll move into the Trials file system MCP, and then we will build. And everything looks good here. The build actually does happen automatically because it's defined within the package.json. that the build will happen as part of prepare. But we've run it anyway, that's fine. And now we can test out with the model context protocol inspector. The exact path is going to be this. So notice that we're running npx to run the inspector. We're then within that running npx on the local file path, which is for Trellis file-system-mcp. And then we're passing in another path. This is the path that we're allowing access to in the file system. So this is a security feature of the file system MCP. We're going to keep that feature in our modified MCP. So when I run this here, I will be able to open it up, connect. And if I list the tools, you can see there are all of the original tools, but we're now able to read specific lines. So if I go to a README file, let's say this README here, and I want to read the first, say 3 lines, I'll just say 1 and 3. And yeah, that's failed because that specific file I picked is outside the allowed path. So I need to pick a file that's in the allowed path, which is this path here. So let's copy that path, go across, and I passed in a docx, which is a bad idea. I should pass in the MD, and here we go. We're able to read that out and specific lines. So this is working great. And let's just see, if I wanted to be pedantic, yeah, no, it's optional. We want these lines to be optional. So we want the default to just be to read the full file. Okay, so we're pretty much done with testing locally. And we could also test using Claude by passing this in. So it's the same thing. We're passing the local directory, and then we're also passing the directory we want to give access to. And now we can republish this as an npm package. So for that, we're just going to log into npm. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'll open this here, and I'll need to get a code. So I've entered the code here, and that means I should be logged in now, which I am. You can build the package. We've already built it, so that's done. And now we can publish it. So it's going to publish it as 0.3.0, which looks good. And now we can use this package. So we can just point now, it's even more terse, to Trellis/MCP file system. And then we need to pass in the allowed folder. So I'm going to copy this here, and I'm going to put it into Claude. So let's go to Claude, because remember, we want to be able to make this work, not just with Cursor, but with Claude. So I'll edit my configuration here, and I'm going to paste in the Trellis file system, put a comma here. And I also want to be able to run with UVX. So I think this is also in good shape. I've put in basically UVX, which is calling my docx-convert. So it's calling my docx-convert MCP. And then this is calling my file system MCP that allows for specific line reading. Now I need to close Claude and reopen it, but actually I don't want to reopen it just by, say, opening Claude directly. I want to open it via the terminal. And that's because if you open Claude directly, it will use a minimal path. A minimal path means it may not have access to PyPandoc. It may not have access to LaTeX that's needed for marker PDF. So actually I'm going to do open A, and then I'm going to do Claude. And this gives Claude, when it's opened, the same path as the system, where I have got everything that I've installed. So it looks like everything is in good shape. And my goal here is to read this document. So copy the path, and I'm going to say read the first 10 lines. And with any luck, it's going to ask me to convert. It should convert into Markdown, and then it should try and read. So already this is looking good. It's calling the right command. And in the meantime, I can delete this docx. Okay, great. So it converted it into Markdown, and now it's going to read. And it's reading the first 10 lines. And that is a thing of beauty. Okay, the formatting here is not a thing of beauty, but yes, this is very nice. I've now got a tool just using Claude Desktop that allows me to read any PDF or docx on my system by converting it, and then by using the specific read within the file system from that MCP. Building MCP servers was quite a bit trickier than I expected. I thought it would just be a few lines of code, but even when you get help from an LLM to build your server, you tend to run into a lot of issues with paths and also with installing the dependencies within the environment and then running from that environment as you expect. Now, granted, there are tools that help quite a bit. The fact that UVX and NPX allow you to install services into a temporary environment means you can run these services pretty much with one command. However, you need to have them properly packaged, and that's why I made this whole video to bring you through step by step. As per usual, all of the links that are key are in the description below. You can purchase the scripts over at trellis.com/advanced-inference. And if you have any questions, let me know below in the comments. Cheers.